when he turns to the woman and responds, Simon, do you see this woman? You didn't do this, but she's done this. That whole section, okay? Hospitality actually was a huge deal in ancient Eastern culture as well. To have a dinner party. And so hosts would often, out of obligation to be hospitable, to be culturally acceptable, they would provide for their guests a bowl of water at the door so the guests could wash their feet of the dust of the road from traveling. They didn't have nice paved roads like we do now, and they walked pretty much everywhere they went. And so you'd get incredibly dirty as you were journeying from place to place. And so hosts would often provide a bowl of water at the door so the guests could actually wash their feet when they came in and clean themselves up. Also, it was a custom to greet the honored guest with a kiss, and this was an ultimate sign of respect and welcome in that day. To actually, the scriptures actually talk about greeting each other with a holy kiss. They would actually give the honored dinner guest a kiss, and it was this sign of ultimate respect that you are honored in this place. And then the third thing was hosts would often provide their guests with olive oil for their hair. And this was a hospitable way to basically help them freshen up. It was a thing that they would use to kind of freshen up from their journey. So this hospitality was a big deal back in this day. And so Jesus, as he responds to Simon, says, listen, you didn't even do what you were obligated to do, and yet this woman has gone out of her way from the time she walked in here to lavish me since the moment I arrived. He says, in essence, she has done everything for me that you were obligated to do, and yet she has not done it out of a sense of obligation. Her motivation is so much different. This wasn't about being obligated to respond a certain way. Simon had this obligation, and yet Jesus is saying, you didn't even do what you were obligated to do, and yet you want to judge this woman who has done everything that you were obligated to do, and yet it was not out of a sense of obligation. It was out of a whole different stream of motivation. And so I ask again, what is it that causes someone to set aside all common sense, all dignity, honor, and respect to recklessly give of themselves to another? If you read on in the text, Jesus actually answers that question, and we read it. I don't know if you caught it or not. Jesus calls it love. This woman has loved much. She's loved much. Have you ever been in love before? Raise your hand if you've been in love. All you husbands better raise your hands. Sure. Love often produces an extraordinary response in us, doesn't it? It's crazy some of the things we do for the sake of love, isn't it? We do some pretty foolish things when we are in love. We ignore all responsibility. I remember, man, when I first fell in love with Carrie, I remember skipping class. Who cares? I just want to be with this person all the time. We spend recklessly money that we don't have. Who cares? I'm so in love. They're worth it. They're worth it. We behave sometimes in otherwise humiliating ways, don't we? I picture the classic movie scene of the man standing outside the window serenading his love at the top of his lungs. Everybody else screaming out, "Shut up!" He doesn't care. So in love. He doesn't care what anybody thinks. He's unaware. He's uncaring because he's in love. William Barclay says this. Listen to this quote. I think this is fascinating. Speaking of love, he says, love does not stop to calculate the less or the more. Love does not stop to work out how little it can respectably give. With a kind of divine extravagance, he said, love gives everything it has and never counts the cost. Calculation, he says, is never any part of love. Isn't that fascinating? Isn't that interesting? Isn't it so true? Man, we truly find ourselves in love with something. Calculation is never a part of that. We never approach, maybe we do and we need some counseling, but we should never approach our relationship with our spouse and go, how much do I really have to give them to get by in this relationship? How much do I have to really invest in? I give you this enough, this much, is that enough? Can we get by with that, and then will you leave me alone and let me do my own thing? No, we're in love. We want to invest ourselves wholeheartedly, 100%, give everything we can. I know sometimes we don't do a great job of that. But that's the heart behind it, and that's the heart behind being in love. We don't sit and calculate what we have to do to make this work. We want to invest ourselves wholeheartedly. This was not a woman who carefully calculated her approach to Jesus and how much she needed to give him in order to still be accepted by him. This was a woman who apparently had an encounter with an extravagant Savior and was so overcome with love and adoration that she storms into this party and recklessly and extravagantly just gives herself to Jesus. Yours. Holding nothing back. I mean, as we observe this story, there's probably nobody who would likely question whether or not this woman loved Jesus. Any of you who would doubt or question whether or not this woman loved Jesus? Why? Is it because she says over and over again, Jesus, I love you, Jesus, I love you, Jesus? No. Her actions show it well, don't they? We can observe this story from a distance thousands of years later. Oh man, that's a woman who loved Jesus. That's a woman who meant it. It wasn't just that she said she loved him. She lived in such a way that she showed that she truly loved him. So I wonder today, do you love God? Not just can you muster up the words, I love you, God. Not just can you gather in this place once a week and go through the motions and put on your happy Christian face and say what you're supposed to say and do what you're supposed to do. Do you love him? Do you love him enough that people recognize it by what you do? And not just because you say you do. Let me use this illustration. Did your mom ever tell you when you were young, it's not what you say, it's how you say it? Anybody ever get that before? It's not what you say, it's how you say it. I hate it when your mom said that. Anyway, putting that aside. I would suggest here in this situation, though, in this dealing with this topic, it's not what you do, it's how you do it, and perhaps even more importantly, it's why you do it. It's not just what you do, it's not, and I hope you're capturing that as we go through this series, it's not just about the acts of worship, it's not about the things you do, but it's how you do them, and more importantly, why you do them. I think we've focused too much in the church on the what question and not enough on the why question. We've spent so much time on the questions of what we should do and shouldn't do. Do this and don't do that. These are the do's and don'ts, and that's what's turned so many people off from following Christ, is it becomes all these rules of do's and don'ts, and it was never meant to be that way. There are things we should be doing and shouldn't be doing. But it isn't about this list of do's and don'ts. It's not about what we're doing. We focus so much on what we should be doing and shouldn't be doing that we've forgotten why we do or don't do those things. We just do them because that's what we're supposed to do. And we forget why do we even do that? What's the motivation behind it? There's this church that's described in the book of Revelation that it appears by its description to be an exemplary church. It was a church that you and I would likely be very proud and very excited to be part of. It was a church that Jesus himself in the book of Revelation had commended as a hardworking and faithful church. It's described to us as being patient in enduring persecution, but it was also relentless in dealing with sin in its midst. It was doctrinally sound. It was a church that was described as being careful to examine its teachers and preachers with respect to the biblical truth of the gospel. I mean, they were doing all the things that they should have been doing right. Whenever false doctrine made an appearance in this church was able to recognize it and was faithful to deal with it. It had a reputation for persevering in times of trial and did not become weary in the service of the Lord. And how many of you would love to be a part of a church like that? Man, that's a church that's got it going on. They got their ducks in a row. They know what they're doing. Any one of us would feel honored to be such a part of that church that Jesus himself would describe in such terms. But there was one very serious problem with this otherwise great church. There was one thing that the book of Revelation tells us was so wrong, so displeasing to the Lord, that he even warned them in this passage that he was about to take this church's opportunity for ministry away and to set it off to the sidelines.